Welcome to the Go Dyslexia webinars, where dyslexia experts share strategies, technology, products, and more. And now, your strategy and product guru, Dr. Erica Warren.
This week, I am so excited to share with you another assistive technology video with Victor Karkar, the CEO of Scrible. Scrible is an amazing online tool that students can use to annotate and color code online text and simplify the process of writing research papers. This extraordinary technology that is recognized by the National Science Foundation can help students to read and write more efficiently, and most of all, it offers them a step-by-step process that can be monitored and supported by teachers and parents. Scrible offers single-click citations, bibliographies, color coding, sharing, organizing, and annotating features. What's more, it integrates with Google Drive, offers a free Google Docs add-on, and can sync with Google Classroom for individualized student analytics. They offer a free plan, but I highly recommend upgrading to the Education Pro plan at only $10 a year for grade school and $28 a year for higher education. It's well worth the added features. This episode of the Go Dyslexia podcast is brought to you by GoodSensoryLearning.com. Hey everyone, I am so excited to have here with me Victor. He is the CEO of Scrible, and Scrible is an amazing tool. Actually, I should call it Scribble, yes. Right? It's yes. Scribble, but it's spelled with one B.
That's right.
And what I love about Scribble is it's great for all students, but it's particularly wonderful for students with dyslexia or language-based learning disabilities, as well as those with executive functioning weaknesses. So, Victor, take it from here. Show us.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for this opportunity. It's really great to talk to you. We did build Scribble really for sort of a general audience, really anybody that we think can benefit from tools that helps with research and writing. And, it's funny that that I'm talking to you today, because we've actually gotten a lot of interest lately from folks such as learning specialists and in the kind of learning disabilities arena who look at Scribble and see tools that can help students that are maybe struggling with some of the things that you described, for example, executive function, or just getting organized. And so I thought what I would do is maybe walk you through what Scribble is that really anybody can use. And then you're obviously the expert in this arena. And so you can maybe help point out the things that you think are particularly valuable for the kids in this audience. Does that make sense?
Sounds great.
Great. Okay. So what I'm going to do is share my screen here, and then we'll start a little walkthrough and demo. So, just a high-level background for folks that haven't heard of us before. We've basically built what we consider to be a modern platform for research and writing. And we started actually in the research arena. So we started with, how do you do research on the web effectively? What are all the different steps, and what are some of the tools that we felt were really lacking in this day and age? And one of the first things we started with was the ability to actually annotate content appropriately. And the reason for this is that, frankly, despite the fact that we live in the internet era where so much of the world's knowledge has moved to the web, a lot of us are still using what we consider to be sort of, from our perspective, broken desktop era workflow to do daily research if you're working on something like, a research paper if you're in school. And what that means is that students that might be working on something like a research paper or a project, unfortunately, many of them are still going to their browser and then printing articles out so that they can annotate them by hand, or copying and pasting bits and pieces into a Word document or Google Doc, kind of a scrapbooking methodology. And we felt like that's just sort of wrong for the times, given the fact that so much of the knowledge that we access on a regular basis is in the cloud. We wanted to make it easy for people to be able to annotate content directly in the browser and keep it in the cloud and collaborate on it. And so what I'm going to show you here is how that works in our system. For those folks that use sort of Google products, my demo is sort of tailored that way, but you don't necessarily have to use all the things that I show here. I just happen to show it the way that I'm going to show it to you because I know that a lot of folks in in the education market these days are actually using Google Chrome and some of the Google products that I'll point out along the way. So let's say, for example, that you're a student that is doing a paper, writing a paper or doing some research about space exploration, which is kind of a hot topic these days with SpaceX and so many interesting things in the news. What we have is a Chrome extension, which sits right here in your browser. You can see it in the top right. And it's our Scribble toolbar Chrome extension. And what that means is that when you click on it, it'll actually load our toolbar over any web page that you're on while you're doing research on the web. And what you see here, just to kind of give you a quick overview, is that there's a whole bunch of different buttons that allow you to do different things with this web page. And so let me switch over to an actual article that, for example, might be used in an example like this. So let's say that I am looking at an article about SpaceX, hypothetically, right? So, and here's an article from a newspaper, and they talk about the historic SpaceX booster. So if I click on that, you will see that the article comes up. And what I can do, if this is an article that's of interest to me for my project, is click on this Chrome extension. It'll load our toolbar on top of the page. And now, and so what you can do now with this is a variety of things. Some of the things that you've kind of always done in the offline world, or you've taken for granted in the word processing world, but you've never really been able to do well with regards to online articles directly in the browser. So, for example, you can highlight, you can add notes, you can change the text color of the text that's on the page, you can underline, bold, italicize, and strike through. So I'll show you what some of those things, how they look. So once you've turned the highlighter on, you can literally just go through and highlight as you're used to doing, let's say in the word processing world. You can do that with different colors and styles. So I'll just pick a different color here, for example. And then what's great is that you can actually hover over these annotations and see that there's a context menu that lets you, for example, delete the highlight, change its color to maybe a different color. Let's change that to blue. You can even attach a note to this highlight. Right, so maybe I say, this is great for my conclusion for my paper, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things the features that I love the most about this is by color coding, you can actually define colors for each of the paragraphs that you want to write. So as long as you've defined your main ideas, then you can color code your main ideas and then go across articles and then pull all of that stuff together, and it turns it into a no-brainer. Because normally if you just highlight everything one color, you still have to categorize. But if you're kind of categorizing as you highlight, it saves you an enormous amount of time.
That's right. And we've actually built some sophistication around that. So I'll show you that in just a moment, where you can provide almost like a categorization to the types of annotations that you put on the page, and then how you can pull them all together. So I'll show you that in just a few minutes. But the main thing I wanted to point out here is that there's a lot of sort of sophistication around what you're doing on the web page, from being able to highlight to add notes and some other things that you're used to doing in the word processing world. You can also do things like actually capture sort of a permalink, for example, that will, if you share that link, let's say over social media, or you just email it to somebody, it'll actually basically send that recipient directly to that highlight on that page. It'll actually scroll them specifically to that highlight.
Wow. So if you found like something and you're like, oh, I love this, I want to share this quote with my best friend, you can highlight it and then just send them just the highlight?
Yeah, that's right. You can grab a link to that. We show you that basically you would get it, let's say here. Let me show you that right here. You grab this permalink, you click on this and it'll give you a link, and then you can actually put that link into an email, and then it'll actually, when your friend basically clicks in on that, they'll basically be taken specifically to that quote, if that makes sense.
To that quote. Now, do they also come to the article?
Yes. It's the highlighted quote in context in the article.
Got it. Very cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's always been a challenge in the realm of web annotation, and this has been the case since the internet bubble many years ago, is the ability to actually, be able to make annotations on a page in a way that, is frankly not annoying. So one of the things that's always been difficult about doing web annotation is that web pages have kind of a strange layout. They're dynamic. They can be, odd to make selections on. So for example, if you try to select something, you might accidentally overselect what you wanted to. And to address that, one of the things that we've built is kind of this undo and redo capability. So for example, you can click undo, and it'll actually change, it'll roll back the changes you've made to the page, or you can redo them and you can sort of see them all come back, right? So that's a concept that we've borrowed from word processing that people are used to, but it's really useful if you've made a mistake or something like that.
Yeah.
Next, just going from left to right here, we've got this legend feature, and this is what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned that we make it easy for you to kind of categorize what's on the page. So let me just expand this a little bit, but it's kind of dynamic. So for example, if you were to make an additional highlight or something like that on the page, let me underline a passage here, you'll see that it'll automatically show up in this annotation legend on the right-hand side. And the way you can use this, there's many different ways you could use this, but from a student's perspective, you might use this to help organize your thoughts, right? So you might say, for example, the green highlights are great for or the green annotations are great for the intro to my paper, and the blue highlights and the blue notes are great for the conclusion to my paper. And then when they hover over those, they'll see it says intro here or conclusion there, right? So it becomes an easy way for you to kind of essentially make sense of how you're marking up the page.
Now, what if you're doing research with a group of students? Can they all have access to this?
So right now, the way it works is that you can basically save this article and then share it with someone, and then they can annotate it. Or we've also got the concept of shared libraries, where you can actually save this in essentially think of it as a shared repository, where other people can also have access to that, almost like putting something into a shared folder that other people have access to. And so those are two different ways in which other people can actually annotate and see the same articles that you're looking at and working with. And then one of the other things that's really important is that we've basically, for students, baked in a full service citation service directly into Scribble. So if I click on this button that has two quotes on it, you'll see a little citation window pop up. And what this is it's basically the fields that you would need for the bibliography later, right? And at the top, we actually show you the citation by default. It's typically the MLA style, but you can actually choose different styles that you might need. And for most folks, one of these sort of three common formats will do. It's MLA, APA, and Chicago. Although we do support now all 7,000 citation formats under the sun. And you can actually search for those in this little box here. So you can do a search for, I think.
I love that feature. It really takes the pain out of doing a bibliography.
But of course, there's some fields that are missing. We auto-extract whatever we can directly from the web page to help streamline the workflow and make it easy so kids don't have to do as much sort of copying and pasting. But there may be fields that we haven't captured for whatever reason. And so if the publisher in this case has not been captured, it's obviously an empty field, and we put a thin red border around it so the student knows that that's something that they need to go get. And for whatever reason you need to change the citation style, you can do that. And when you switch to, let's say, APA, you'll see that the way it looks up top is different as well. Okay? So that's that. Now, I'll kind of maybe skip over some of these things or gloss over them and not go into as much detail, but I will maybe speak to them. So there's an option here to bookmark this page. And let me just be very clear about what that is versus, let's say, saving the page, which is this sort of other button that you see in the toolbar. So bookmarking the page just grabs the article URL and possibly the title. There's one important difference in the way that we do bookmarking, and that is that we do still capture the full text of the page. We go out to the web and we crawl those pages so that they become full text searchable within your Scribble library later. So it's almost like having a little search engine built into your Scribble library, which is where the rest of your stuff is stored. And so when you do a search for anything in your Scribble library, we search not only the article title of a bookmark, but also the full text of that article out on the live web. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great. You can also share this article by email, over social media, and like a permalink. So in all those cases, when the recipient or the viewer or the sharee gets that link or views it and clicks through on it, they're actually going to be brought to a annotated version of the article so they can see that.
You could actually have one that's already color-coded and annotated.
Right.
And then you could just send them the permalink and say, well, while you're doing this, if you want to look at the one that I did as a demonstration, you can check this out.
It can be a model. That's right. And when you're ready, basically, you can save this annotated article. And by default, everybody has what we call My Library, which is where things are stored. But of course, if you are using Scribble in a kind of more sophisticated way, you may have other libraries. And I can speak a little bit later to what that is and how you create other libraries. But for now, let's just stick with My Library. We'll leave the page name, the default page name that it is for this article. You could add any comments that you wanted. And then we also allow tags to be added to this article so that they can get organized and then become searchable later by those tags. So let me see here. I think I have a tag here called SpaceX. And what you're seeing here is that as I start typing, we start narrowing the list of tags that already exist in this student's library. So it becomes really easy to just sort of quickly start typing and see all the tags that are relevant. If that makes sense.
Nice.
Yeah. So when I click save, basically a copy of this article with the citation information and the annotations all gets saved to the library in the cloud. And the way that you access that is either you can go to our webpage and sort of sign in, just like you sign into, let's say, Gmail or Facebook or something like that. Or since you're already kind of logged in here, which you can tell because this little guy is green instead of gray, you can actually click on the library button in the toolbar, and it'll open up a new browser tab and automatically bring you directly into your library. Okay. So now the layout of the library is sort of Gmail-esque, if you will, in the sense that in Gmail you would normally see these as being your inbox and all the emails in your inbox. In our case, we call it the library, and it's full of articles instead of emails. In Gmail over here, you would normally see labels. We call them tags. And then here you would normally see a set of filters. And so we have a set of filters that are unique to, obviously, what we're doing. Now, let me bring you back to the library for a moment and point out that what you're seeing here is a little icon next to each library entry or every source that's in the library. In some cases, there's saved web pages like the one that we just saved that's been annotated and has citation information associated with it. In some cases, you'll see bookmarks. And in a few moments, I'll show you how you can also add docs like PDFs and how those would appear here in here as well. You can see on this article that we just saved that there's been a couple of tags that have been applied. And if I take you down to the tags here, you'll see that there's a few tags that I've added in this library. And if I click on, let's say, Mars missions, you'll see this article has Mars missions as well. Basically, we filtered the entire library to only show the articles that have been tagged Mars missions. So here you're seeing all those articles that have been tagged that. Nice. Now, one of the cool things we've done is we've enabled what we call multi-tag filtering, which basically means that you can actually you can basically narrow your items in your library by selecting multiple tags at the same time. So it becomes an easy way for you to kind of go through the whole library with a couple of clicks and find the things that were most relevant. We also full text index all the content in the library. So whether it's bookmarks or saved articles or PDFs that have been saved in your library, we full text index all of it to make it all keyword searchable. And so it's, again, a very Gmail-esque or kind of Google-esque experience where you can really leverage the power of search to find things like a needle in a haystack. And so, for example, if I do a search for the word Venus, we'll search the entire library and only show you the articles where the word Venus appears someplace in the article or in any of the notes that you've added to the article. Now, the filters kind of work the way you'd expect. If you click on just web pages, we'll show you only the articles that were saved cached web pages. If you click on bookmarks, we'll only show you the bookmarks. So that's kind of pretty, I think pretty intuitive. Let me show you some other things that we added recently that maybe some of our older users aren't familiar with since we just launched this a couple of months ago, which is some new capabilities under this sort of plus button here. And the first one and the most important one, I think, is the ability to sort of add docs like PDFs and Word docs directly to your library. And so what I can do is I can literally select one or multiple files on my desktop, and I click open, and it'll actually upload those files. It'll show me the progress, and it's usually pretty quick. And you might see some activity here in the background. What's happening is that as these files are being uploaded, they're actually getting added to my library, and they automatically get tagged uploaded so that you can later identify which of the files that you added from your desktop. Okay?
Great.
Another thing, which I think is almost more interesting, is that you can actually now drag and drop files directly into your Scribble library. So let's say I go into this folder, and there's 3 files here. I can literally select them all, and if I hover over the library with them, as I'm dragging them, you'll see it says drag and drop. If I let go, it'll again add those directly to my library, and it'll apply the system tag called uploaded. So you can see all the things that were uploaded into the library. Okay? So now, at this moment in time, you can essentially do everything with documents like PDFs in our system that you can do with web pages, except annotate them. So we are actually planning to add PDF annotation in the very near future. But for now, you can do everything except. So you can basically save them, search them, tag them, and then annotation is going to be coming in the coming semesters. So if I just go down here, I'm going to skip this create paper for a moment and just point out a couple other things. So you can add bookmarks to your library just by copying and pasting in the title and the URL in case you don't want to add them through the Chrome extension and the toolbar that I showed you earlier. This is an alternate mechanism of getting that stuff into the library. You can also add offline sources. So one of the things that we've been asked for quite some time is, the ability to support students who might be looking at, offline books and magazines. How do you actually capture that in the library? How do you capture that source within the library, since it's an offline source, and everything else we built basically works with online content. So our initial answer for now is basically we've got some form fields here. You can just enter in the title and the description and manually enter in the citation information. But we've got some plans to make this a little bit more automated and sophisticated in the future. Okay. If you're using any sort of other bookmarking mechanisms like bookmarking things in your browser, you can actually click on this import bookmarks option, and it'll bring you to a page that'll give you some options on whether you want to import from your browser, or some people are still using older bookmarking services like Delicious to do that as well. Okay. Great. Now, I'm going to point out a couple things, and I think that are kind of interesting related to how you can work with the content that's in your library. So let me go down to, let's say, these couple of items that I'm selecting for my library. Let me pick 5 of them. Actually, let's pick 4 of them. You'll see here that there's a Create Bibliography button. If I click on that, what will happen is we'll instantaneously pull the citations from those 4 articles and essentially create a bibliography on the fly. So that's what you're seeing here. Make sense?
That tells me that it would be a really good idea for all of the students to fill in the missing data as they're going along. That way, anytime they want to select those, the bibliography is fully complete.
That's right. That's right. If you collect it along the way, then it's always saved there with all the entries in the library. And then if you do something like this, you'll have all the information correct. And of course, on the left-hand side, again, you can choose the format that you want. And what you can see is if we switch from MLA to APA, it'll instantaneously update in real time, so you can sort of see the right format.
Pretty cool.
Okay. I'll go back to my library, and I'm going to show you something that is maybe even cooler. Again, I'm going to choose a couple of articles here. Let me pick these 4. Actually, this is the same one. So pick these 4 articles and click on an option to create a summary. Now, this basically gets into what you were talking about earlier, where you can use the power of color coding. If you click on this Create Summary option, what it does is it extracts all the notes and highlights out of those 4 articles that I chose in my library and drops them into a simple one-page summary view. So what you're looking at here is all the notes and highlights for this first article, all the notes and highlights that I made for the second article, and so forth. Great. Now, I do want to point out one sort of other important feature, I guess, and then I'll kind of switch over to some other things that I think are valuable. If I want to take this article and maybe copy it over to a different library that I have access to, I can do that, because you may remember that earlier I had mentioned that there are other libraries that you can create or you can have access to. Before I do that, though, let me actually show you what it means to have other libraries. So far, we've been looking just at this one library, right? This is my library, as it says here, and everybody kind of gets that as a default. Basically, the idea here is if you're using kind of one of the premium versions of Scribble, you would have the option to create other libraries. And if I click on this, you'll see here a list of other libraries that this particular student has access to. So these might be different projects or different papers associated with different classes. And so, for example, I think, let's see, most of these are just empty, but I think I've got a space exploration one here that has the same look and feel as the My Library, in terms of the layout and what you see in it. But there are a couple of important differences between, another library like this one and My Library. And that one of those is that every library has its own set of tags. And so what you're seeing here is a shorter list of tags than I showed you previously, because you don't want to kind of, pollute, tags or libraries with tags that are irrelevant for that particular project or that particular library. And so this particular, set of tags is sort of unique to this library. The other thing is that you'll see a little edit icon that shows up to the right of the name. And that's because you can actually sort of, when you create this library, define what the library is about, decide who you want to share it with, and then you can specifically set permissions for that particular set of people that you're sharing with. And so the point of showing you that was kind of a setup so that I can show you what happens if you take an article like this one that we just saved and annotated, and you wanted to copy it or move it to one of the other libraries that you have access to. So let's say Mars Missions was the one I think we looked at. I'm going to create a complete copy so that it goes over there. And you'll see here that it says it was successfully copied over. Oops. And so if I go to that library now, you'll see here this is the article that we copied over.
Nice.
So you can easily move things between libraries. You can either move them over, or you can copy them over, etc. Okay. One of the really important sort of second major things that we've added as of a couple of months ago is a real emphasis on writing through an integration with Google Docs. For folks that are not familiar, a lot of schools and students are actually using Google Docs these days, and it's because Google's kind of had a big footprint in the education market. And so a lot of writing is happening in Google Docs. And from our perspective, the nice thing about that is that Google's actually enabled folks like us to build integrations and add-ons for Google Docs. And so for folks that are not familiar, there's this option in Google Docs that's a menu item called add-ons. And so the integration we've built with Google Docs is through this sort of add-ons functionality that they've provided. And the way this works is that in any Google Doc, you can click on this add-ons menu. And normally these add-ons that I've added in this particular case would not exist. You wouldn't see any. You'd have to sort of go to the add-ons gallery, which you can do by clicking on that. And you'll see that a whole bunch of different add-ons will come up in the gallery. And you can search for them here. You can just browse them and see what's there, and you can add any add-ons. In our case, once you've added our add-on, you would actually see it appear here along with any other add-ons that you'd added to your Google Docs. So ours is called Scribble Writer. And the way this works is that when you want to sort of activate the add-on, you would click Start, and a sidebar will show up, which is our sidebar for the add-on. What you'll see here basically is that there's a sidebar here that allows the student to be able to search their entire Scribble library directly from within Google Docs, which is pretty powerful.
Wow.
So this demo is set up a little bit differently. It's not about space exploration. It's about, let's say, Susan B. Anthony. So the way the demo is set up is, let's say I'm in 10th grade social studies, and we're studying the women's suffrage movement, and I'm writing a paper about Susan B. Anthony. So maybe a week or two ago, I did a bunch of research. I went out to the web, and I collected a bunch of articles, hypothetically. And now it's time for me to write my paper. So I sit down to write my paper, and I call up my Scribble Writer Google Docs add-on, and now I can actually search for things that I had saved in my Scribble library directly from right here while I'm writing. So if I do a search for the word Susan, what you'll see is I'll get back some search results, and they come in two different tabs. One tab is quotes, the other tab is general references, and I'll tell you what each one of those means. With quotes, what you're seeing here is basically all the notes and highlights that I've made where the word Susan appears in them in any of the articles in my Scribble library. Okay? And so what you see here is that the search term Susan appears here in this purple highlight, it appears here in this yellow highlight, and so on. And what you're seeing here is a little snippet of the annotation itself, and below that is the article title as a link. So now let's say that it's been a while since I've done this research, and I don't remember why it was that I highlighted this passage in purple. I can actually click on this article title, and it'll open up a new browser tab and automatically take me exactly to where that evidence was highlighted, right? So let me take a second here, but it'll load up the page, and it'll scroll me specifically to where that annotation is right there. And in this case, it's actually it's the anchor text for this note. We refer to the text that the notes anchor to the anchor text. So it was this purple highlight that you're seeing light up when I hover over the note. Okay. Similarly, if I click on this other article title, it'll do the same thing. It'll actually open up a new browser tab and bring me exactly to where I had made that highlight in the article. And again, if it's a really long article, this is really useful because we'll scroll you specifically to where in that article you've made that highlight.
I love that. I love that it scrolls for you too. That's pretty nifty.
Yeah, so you don't have to go hunting for it, right, if it's a long article. Now, as you can see here, as I hover over these different annotations, there's a little red button here that says Add to Paper. So this does exactly what it says. When you hover over it and you click on Add to Paper, it'll actually take that highlight and actually insert it directly into the Google Doc as a piece of evidence, and in quotes, and then it'll actually insert an in-text citation in parentheses at the end.
Oh my gosh, it even does a citation for you?
Yeah.
Holy moly. Wow, what a time saver.
In our case, you'll see that each one of these in-text citations are actually links. And so you can actually click on that link, and it'll actually automatically, again, take you directly to that student's work and where that annotation was made, right?
Oh, that's so good.
So from the perspective of somebody that's actually reviewing the work, it becomes much easier to validate the quality of the evidence, to see if it's been taken out of context, etc. We're also working on some features that I won't get into in much detail right now that will actually potentially make that even easier while the student's actually doing the research. I told you I would tell you about the general references tab, so let me switch over to that really quick. What this is it's showing basically any place where the word Susan appears anywhere in the article and not necessarily just inside a quote that you've highlighted. And so it's kind of more like a general reference. And in this case, what you can do is if you hover over these things, you can basically add them to your bibliography. And so it doesn't appear as a quote in the paper, but it gets added to your bibliography as a reference in the bibliography. And I keep talking about the bibliography, so let me actually show you how that looks. If you click on this button here, we pop open a window that says Bibliography Preview. And what you're seeing here basically is that we've got the two sources that correspond to the two pieces of evidence that were brought into the paper. And then the student can actually edit or delete these. The power of this is basically that we're kind of automatically maintaining the bibliography on behalf of the student as they're working on their paper, right? Because we know essentially kind of where the original information came from, and they had actually already collected that information while they were doing the work. So the nice thing is that it's there, and when they click on this button here to add it to their paper, and hopefully free up some of their time so they can spend more of that time on the more important higher order cognitive activities, like thinking about the quality of the sources or the structure of the arguments and those kinds of things.
I guess one of the things that I tell my students the most that concerns me is that they're having to multitask too much. And when you're having to multitask, you don't do anything very well. And all these little features that you have to think of doing with your bibliography and with references pull you away from the main idea of the content. And if we can take some of those pieces away, then their writing is actually going to improve dramatically.
So in terms of the research and writing process, we think we've kind of streamlined a lot of the workflow from the student's perspective, where, if you're in the beginning where you're actually collecting sources and annotating them on the web, or, you're in the middle of the process where you've collected all the things and now you're organizing and tagging them and searching them and revisiting them, to the end when you're actually writing the paper and putting the bibliography together, we try to streamline as much of that as possible. And we have even sort of more things like that are kind of in the hopper that'll make that process better. But from the student's perspective, we think we've kind of tried to make that much better. Now, what I'll mention is here that in this sort of big update that we had a couple of months ago, we actually created a whole bunch of new capabilities that are really aimed at the educator as opposed to the student. So what I was going to point out is that, again, a couple of months ago, we launched a whole bunch of new things, including a bunch of classroom capabilities that are really aimed more at the educator. And so when you're in your Scrible EDU account, which is really aimed at students and educators, you'll see a classroom tab now. And if you click on that, what you'll see is that there are classes and sections and sort of student rosters associated with them. Now, this might be more for teachers that are actually teaching in the classroom, but it might be useful for folks in your community to know about as well, particularly if they're working closely with any of the teachers. So I won't kind of go through all the bells and whistles, but I'll sort of say that we've built the equivalent of some lightweight learning management system functionality just to be able to make us easier to use in a class or a school setting. So when you first come in, you wouldn't have any classes in here, and you as the educator can actually create those classes. So you can go through and fill out some fields and create the class name and the first section and things like that. And when you've done that, you'll see those classes appear here, and there'll be some information that says how many sections and how many students are in that class. So for example, if I go into this AP World History class, you'll see that there's just one section that's called Period 1. It shows you the dates. And then if I go a little bit deeper, it'll show you the 17 students that are actually part of that section. Now, if I want to invite more students to that section, I can click on that button, and there's two ways or two options to do that. The first option is that you can share an invite code with those students. And what that would mean is basically maybe I write this up on the board and they write it down, or I can send it to them by email. And when they then navigate to the classroom tab in their accounts, they can enter that code into a certain place that we indicate, and those students will automatically get added to that class in that section. Okay. The other option is that I can actually invite them by email, and I can just basically copy and paste their email addresses into this box. I would click send invites here, and then all the students would get an invite to this particular class and section. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that we've integrated with recently is Google Classroom. And the reason we've done that is that a lot of teachers are actually using Google Classroom with their students. And Google Classroom, for those folks that are not familiar, is basically a teacher level or class level learning management system. And what this means is that instead of going through that process that I showed you a few minutes ago, where you can sort of manually create your classes and sections, you can actually click on the Sync Classes button. And when you do that, we basically pull up a web page that says that we can import your classes and your sections into Scribble and keep them in sync with Google Classroom. We actually say we can do that with multiple providers, but right now we're just supporting Google Classroom. So what would happen here is that the teacher would, basically click on this, and basically they would have to authorize that connection with Google Classroom account. And when they do that, they're brought to a permissions page. And when they click allow, we basically import their classes and their sections and their students into Scribble. Okay. So it just makes it much easier to start using Scribble in a class setting. That's kind of the idea.
So what are the benefits to using it in a classroom setting?
So there's a few things. So the first thing is that by default, whenever you create a new section or class, we automatically create a class library. So imagine that you are having a class discussion around the presidential debate that happened over the weekend, or there's a reading list that you're kind of creating for the class. Instead of creating in a library and inviting all the students to it, for every class that gets created, you automatically get a class library, which is shown under this tab here. So again, there's not that many classes in this demo account, but for the 2 classes that I have here, you'll see here that there's a class library for this AP World History class. When I click through, again, it looks just like the other libraries that I showed you, but it's associated with a particular class. Mm-hmm. And what this means is that by default, everybody in that class automatically has access to it. And I can actually make some sort of administrative decisions about what to do with that library. So there you'll see a little edit icon that appears here. When I click on that, you'll see there's some permissions here. So I can decide, what permissions to give kids that have access to this library. Okay, and so it becomes a simple way to kind of just drop things into a shared repository that's accessible to everybody in the class. Is the short answer. Okay.
Very nice.
Now, the other 2 things, which I think are sort of more involved and more important, are actually assignments and analytics. So there's an assignments tab here, and what you'll see here is, just ignore this yellow box for a moment. What you'll see here is that we've actually enabled the ability to create research and writing assignments. And so if I click on this, right now we support a research project assignment and a research paper assignment. And a research project assignment is basically one in which the student is basically saving and curating articles. Maybe it's annotated web pages, maybe it's PDFs, and they're saving it to a library that ends up being called an assignment library because it's tied to a specific assignment. And examples of this might be a class discussion, a presentation, or a web quest. And what's amazing about this is that, when the student hands in the assignment, what they're handing in is the entire library. And so for the first time, a teacher has an easy way, or an educator has an easy way of assessing a body of work that's better than just a bunch of links in a Google Doc, right? Or a Word doc. And so you kind of get to sort of see this portfolio of curated content. Maybe it's been annotated, maybe it's been tagged. And you can sort of assess the way the kids are, organizing things and how good they are at organization skills, note-taking, et cetera. When you create an assignment like that, you obviously have to choose what class it's for. And then you have some sort of standard fields. But I wanted to point out 2 things that are, I think, particularly important. One is that you can now set certain goals with the assignment. So you can sort of say, I want this to have, the assignment to have 10 sources. So for every student, they have to collect 10 sources for this research project. Also for younger students, or students that maybe sometimes have difficulty staying focused, teachers have asked us to basically provide recommended sources.
Very nice.
Now, I'm going to take you to an example of a research paper assignment. And the main difference between a project and a paper, aside from the goals, is that when the student hands in the assignment, they're not only handing in the source material, meaning the whole library of sources that they used for that paper, but they're also handing in the Google Doc where they did the writing, obviously. So here's an example of an AP World History class where the paper is about the history of Rome, and the teacher has said, here are your recommended resources that I want you to use. So it's just 3 URLs in this case. And the paper has to have 5 cited sources and 1,000 words. Okay. So now what the educator can do is they can actually look at, and I think this is the most powerful thing we've built recently, a set of analytics that lets you see essentially where everybody is in the process of doing this research and writing this paper. So again, this is a class setting, but you can imagine maybe an individual learning specialist using this with a student on a particular type of an assignment or project. And the idea here would be that, you've got at a class level view, you can see that, all 17 of the students in this class have opened the assignment, 13 have started the research, 4 have not, 11 have started the paper, 6 have not, and so forth. And, it's basically a couple of different steps. Have they looked at the assignment? Have they started the research? Have they started the paper? Have they met the 2 goals associated with the paper regarding the number of cited sources they need to have and the number of words? And then ultimately, have they turned the paper in? So what this does is it gives an educator insight into the process, which is typically a black box, right? And the way we describe this is that, typically if you assign a paper and Billy hands in a bad paper at the end of the assignment, you don't really know what went wrong without a lot of effort. And the reason is that work is oftentimes done offline, where students historically are printing articles out, not using something like Scribble, or they're doing a lot of this work at home, right? Because they're working on this over days and weeks, and this work is being done not in the classroom oftentimes. And so it becomes very hard to kind of see where everybody is and who's getting stuck and who's procrastinating. And this really gives you data that you've never really had before on the process, and more importantly, who's getting stuck along the way. And so what we're trying to do here is really empower teachers and librarians and learning specialists and people in your community to be able to get insight and visibility into a process that they've typically never really had, at least not without a significant amount of effort. And if you're talking about a large group of students, it's almost prohibitively laborious to do that. So this lets you kind of see that, and then most importantly, see who are the kids that maybe are getting the most stuck and help them by intervening with those particular kids. And so,
right, and you can see how to help them. Because, for example, if you analyzed a student and you saw that they didn't start the paper until the night before,
that's right.
You know that you need to help them with planning and time management.
Absolutely.
Versus another student that maybe they planned everything out perfectly, but the paper wasn't very good. Well, they need maybe more help with content.
Right. It could be they did everything in the right time, and it might be that they just picked some bad sources, right? Or
that too.
Yeah.
Well, you can really quickly analyze all sorts of things this way. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and this is at the class level. I also wanted to point out, obviously, that at an individual student level, we have the data, so we can tell you kind of where individual students are. So, for example, in this case, Jordan has saved 6 sources, and she's met the goal of having 5 cited sources, and she's on her way to hitting the goal of having 1,000 words in the paper. Susan over here has done quite well, right? She's already turned her paper in, and she's kind of met or exceeded the goals that were set out for the paper. And then these 3 folks down here, Kara, Chris, and Jeremy, they're all kind of lagging behind in different areas. Jeremy here has maybe done quite well in terms of writing the paper, but maybe he's using a lot of his own words and hasn't actually used a lot of evidence that was required for the paper yet, right?
It makes it really easy to grade as well.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you at a glance, some important information that might help you quickly diagnose folks at a high level. Obviously, you want to dive into the detail a little bit, but at least this gives you some information to get started and see maybe who needs the most help and how to prioritize who to talk to.
I love it. The analytics are beautiful. I love the colors. I love the layout. It's very understandable. It's very readable. Bravo. Well done.
Thank you. I want to make it very clear that in terms of the analytics, we feel like we've only really scratched the surface. Like, we feel like there's so much content and information that's flowing through the system that we have the ability to pull out really interesting and valuable tidbits of information that we hope will support learning specialists, again, librarians, teachers, et cetera. And just an example of that is this last column. So, most of the analytics I've mentioned here have to do with progress and kind of tracking progress. But we want to make it clear that that's not the only kind of insight that we think we can help provide. This last column kind of makes the point by showing that we can also automatically categorize the kind of sources that students are pulling into the system. So, for example, if you hover over this pie chart, you'll see that Jordan has 1 news article, 2 sources from academic websites, a Wikipedia article, and 2 government websites, right? Kara down here has, 2 blog posts, which might be opinion pieces, obviously. And then Chris over here only has 3 sources, and they're new sources, but he only has 3, so he has no diversity of sources in what he's doing. And so for, folks that care about diversity of sources and credibility of sources for an assignment or a project like this, that's sort of insight into maybe what kind of conversations to have with everyone. And we've got some plans to make all this more sophisticated and potentially aggregated up to the class level and things like that.
Nice.
But that's what this does. And, our hope is that we can basically empower people with data that they haven't had before to kind of, just essentially support the students that need the most help and get them on a better trajectory than maybe they would have been otherwise.
Right. And now you know how to help them.
Right.
Instead of just kind of shooting in the dark, because you can ask a student, when did you start the assignment? And they could say a week ago. I mean, I don't know how many times my students backdate,
Right.
things so that nobody knows that they did it at the last minute. That's
Right.
not the type of thing that they're upfront about. But this forces them to be honest. And in fact, might actually get them to start earlier because they know that their teacher will know if they start late.
Right. And I think that we have the opportunity to down the road to potentially show, maybe not too far down the road, but maybe in the coming semester, be able to sort of show interesting results or data around, what happens to performance when students wait to the last minute, for example, right? To kind of draw those correlations, which at some level, maybe intuitively, right? If you wait to the last minute, it's not great, but now you can potentially have the data to help sort of back that up. And then that becomes very, valuable in a whole bunch of different contexts. It can be that, if the student doesn't get a great grade, it becomes a piece of information you can share with the parents around, well, the reason is, Billy waited to the last minute to write the paper, and here's the evidence that shows why. Or even if you just want to have the conversation with the student, sort of say, look, here's where most of the class is, and this is where you're at, and what can I do to help you get caught up, right? So lots of different types of information could be valuable in a lot of different contexts and different conversations, and our goal is to try to identify the most important ones and make those available.
I have to say, this has been fascinating, and I want to thank you so much for giving us this demonstration. So much valuable information.
No problem. Thanks for the opportunity. It's really it's great to talk to somebody who's excited about this kind of stuff. And we hope it's helpful.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Go Dyslexia webinars, where experts share strategies, technology, products, and more. If you want to check out our video podcasts, blog posts, and resources, go to godyslexia.com. Be sure to sign up for Dr. Warren's newsletter and follow us on social media.